Y'all, I heard this quote at church and it reminded me how much I loved it. It's been around for a while. It's from a pastor. His name is John Piper. And he said, God is always doing 10,000 things in your life, and you may only be aware of 3. Which is so true. Like, I don't know if you've ever thought about your life. You only see certain things, but God is working all around us. In my study of Esther, I found a perfect example of this and knew that I had to share it with you because y'all know I love to connect the dots on everything. And this one is just a perfect example of God working. And it's an Esther who I love anyway, but it's not about Esther. Okay? Like, that's what I love about being able to do these is we get to look at a different part of the story that's not often told in church. So we're looking at Mordecai today, and Mordecai is Esther's uncle. And so this all happens within Esther, kind of in a progression. So remember, so we just talked about the beauty pageant. So Esther has won and is going to be queen. She becomes queen, but Mordecai, her uncle, is still there. And I think he works for the king in some capacity because he's able to be around Esther. And he's hanging around and he discovers a plot. So this is in chapter 2, verses 21 through 23. So he discovers a plot to kill the king. And he's like, that's not cool. And so he tells Esther, who in turn tells the king. And the king finds out that it's true. And he takes care of those people. Here's what I want you to hear. Verse 23. And the last sentence in this chapter of chapter 2. This was all duly recorded in the book of the history of King Xerxes' reign. So this happens. It is written down in this book. Nothing to be said of this again. So Mordecai's just doing the right thing. He does it. Everybody moves on. Well, then there comes this other character named Haman, and Haman is not a good guy, and Haman is moved up in the king's reign, or not king's reign, but like he's like pretty much like the next guy under the king, and so all the king's officials are supposed to bow down to Haman to show him respect. You can read all about this in chapter 3. Well, Haman gets mad because Mordecai will not bow down. Haman's not God. Mordecai's not going to bow down to him. He's not even the king, and so this makes Haman really mad. And so Haman then makes it his responsibility to kill Mordecai. But not only is he going to kill Mordecai, he wants to kill all of Mordecai's people who are the Jews. You see how this is all coming together? Like, this is the big plot, you know, where Esther has to come in. You've heard Esther's side of the story. Here's Mordecai's side of the story. He's kind of starts his path. Now we know this is all in God's plans, and if Mordecai wasn't the one to set it in motion, Haman wasn't there, something else would have happened. But this is how it happened, and it's just fascinating to me. So Haman gets really mad at Mordecai, wants to kill all of the Jewish people. This is where Esther has to go and fast and pray with her people, and then Mordecai's favorite line, who knows that you're created for such a time as this? All this happens. And so she invites Haman and the king to dinner twice. And so there's 2 different dinners happening. The first one has happened. The second one is going to be the next night. So it happens. God does his thing. And King Xerxes cannot go to sleep that night. And so he's like, can't sleep. What do I do? He has his people read to him from the book of history, which is where Mordecai's name went down a couple of years before. And so as he's reading, he's like, oh, wait, what happened to Mordecai? And he asked, did anything ever happen? And they're like, no, it didn't. And this is where the story gets fun. Haman, being the weirdo that he is like walking around outside the king's palace. Like, what the heck? He can't sleep either. Like, what is he doing? So it's like the middle of the night. So he's like, hey, invite Haman in then. Since he's here, let's talk about this. And the king asked Haman, how would you honor someone? The Haman, being the pompous person that he is, thinks that the king is about to honor him. So he puts on this elaborate display, parading the king, this person around in the king's robe, lots of crazy stuff. And this is what's really funny. The king goes, all right, that sounds great. Make sure you do all of that, because we're going to honor Mordecai today, and he has to do every single thing that he just mentioned. He has to do that for Mordecai, his like essentially arch enemy. Like, he hates him. I just think that's so cool. Like, God has now set this up for not even revenge, but just like how he orchestrated the whole thing. So that all happens. We know the rest of the story. God saves the Jewish people. But even through all of that, it's a perfect example of this quote by John Piper that God is doing 10,000 things and we only see 3. Because when Mordecai did this good deed, he didn't know what would result in later in Haman's death. He was just doing what God wanted him to do. And so today, when you're just doing what God calls you to do, like, don't think that it's not for waste. Like, you're just doing your things. God is going to honor that. You may or may not see that in your lifetime. But as we've seen today in Mordecai's story, God is working in so many different ways. I hope that you can see that eventually one day in your own life. You'll start to put puzzle pieces together when you're like, oh, this happened for this reason, or this happened for this reason, or you might not know until we're in heaven. But God is working in your life today. Don't ever forget that. And so I'm glad you guys could come study Esther with me today. We'll be back next time.